Hello, everyone. We will begin our session immediately. I hope you are all well rested and well prepared for the opening statements for the Sustainable and Livable Planet track. Please turn on your camera and make sure your internet connection is stable for this session. And if you haven't already, please also change your name to the format that we have been using, which is your country or your institution, and then underscore your track name, in this case SLP for Sustainable and Livable Planet, and then your full name so that we can unmute you smoothly. And may I also ask the technical committee to be on standby and allow delegates to unmute themselves during the session later. So we'll begin in 4 minutes. Thank you very much. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It is with great excitement to welcome you today at the first session, the opening statement session for the Sustainable and Livable Planet track of the Y20 2022 Summit. I want to thank delegates, observers, esteemed guests, and everyone for being here and dialing from different locations around the world. We really appreciate you making the time to be with us today. And I am personally very excited to be hearing opening statements and policy proposals from youth delegates and observers all around the world. My name is Hani Chrysalite. I am the track chair and lead researcher for the Sustainable and Livable Planet track. I was also once a delegate representing Indonesia in 2019 at the Y20 Summit in Japan. I will be leading today's session, and let me also introduce you to the track's team. We have Ina Safira and Nabila Gunawan, the two sous-chairs for the Sustainable and Livable Planet track. And we also have Muhammad Ananda Maulana, or Maul, the research officer, and Nicole, track officer for the Sustainable and Livable Planet track. Before we begin, let me read through the agenda we have for today. If I can ask the technical committee to show the first slide. So as for the agenda for today, we will start with roll calling of all the delegates to ensure attendance. And then we will go over the white paper to set objectives for today's discussion. And then the next one is the opening statement, which is the main thing for today. We will hear opening statement session from delegates, 3 minutes each, and delegates will be called in the alphabetical order. Afterwards, I'll also give chance to observers to share their views, also 3 minutes each. And no slide sharing is allowed in this opening statement session. At last, I'll close with announcement and also reminder of the next meeting and schedule for our track. So we have an exciting schedule ahead of us and certainly, hopefully insightful. We hope to finish within 2 hours time. Okay, so now I will start with the roll call. I think we can stop sharing the slides for now. Thank you. I will call the names of the G20 countries and the EU in alphabetical order. After I call your country or institution's name, please unmute yourself, and the respective delegate or observer for the Sustainable and Livable Planet track should say present. I hope it's clear. Now let me begin with the roll call. The first is Delegate of Argentina. Delegate of Argentina, are you present? If you could unmute yourself and say present if you are here.
Thank you. I wasn't allowed. Present.
Thank you. Next, Delegate of Australia.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of Brazil.
Present.
Delegate of Canada.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of China.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of France.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of Germany. Delegate of Germany, are you present? Okay, Delegate of Germany is not present. Delegate of India?
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of Indonesia?
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of Italy?
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of Japan? Delegate of Japan, are you present? Okay, Delegate of Japan is not present. Next, Delegate of Mexico.
Present.
Delegate of Mexico.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of Russia.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of Saudi Arabia.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of South Africa.
Delegate of South Africa is present.
Thank you. Delegate of South Korea. Delegate of South Korea, are you present? Okay, Delegate of South Korea is not here. Delegate of Turkey.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of the United Kingdom.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of United States of America.
Present.
Thank you. Delegate of the European Union.
Present.
Thank you. Now I will also begin roll calling for the observers. First one, observer of ASEAN. Observer of ASEAN, are you here? Okay, I could hear microphone, but maybe it's not present. Okay, next, observer from Timor-Leste. Observer from Timor-Leste, are you here? Observer from Timor-Leste is not present. Observer from the World Bank, are you here?
Yes, present.
Thank you. Observer from the Pacific Island. Okay, Pacific Island is not here. Observer from the Asian Development Bank. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for confirming your attendance. In my notes, we have 17 delegates and 1 observer in this room, which is more than 2/3 of the delegates. So we can proceed with our session today. Okay, after this, I will give an overview about our white paper and also setting the objectives of today's session. But first of all, I want to thank everyone for your effort in formulating and submitting the policy proposals. As you have seen from the policy prompt and also the white paper, we are onto a very important and urgent topic in this track. We are living in such difficult times. We are constantly bombarded with news around global pandemic, global security, and of course, global planetary crisis. So a sustainable and livable planet Earth is an important issue and is an existential issue to all of us. So although sustainability is an issue that has been discussed every year at the Y20 Summit, we simply cannot ignore the urgency to keep the discussion going because there are still a lot to be done. And hopefully this is an issue that we can all get behind and not a point of contention in this session. So again, allow me to give a brief overview about the white paper for the wider audience. I'm sure the delegates are well aware already about the issue and the white paper, but let me be brief in setting this context for wider audience. So we have developed a white paper to guide the discussion on the sustainable and livable planet track. And our white paper found that 45% of G20 youths think very often about the planetary crisis, and among which are concerned about how environmental issues will affect or are affecting them personally. Youths are very vulnerable to the planetary crisis because youths often have to rely on adults making decisions on their behalf. And unfortunately, 64% felt that they are not being listened enough when they talk about the planet. At the Y20 summit, as well as other youth summits, youths have demanded a radical transformation and to our current economy, to embrace nature and circular economy, and to do it in an equal way to make our planet more livable for the present and future generation. Next slide. So the challenge is the way we humans are living and conducting economic activities. Our economy is linear. We take products from nature, we process them and waste them almost immediately once they are used. This is essentially the challenge underlying most environmental problems. So these two issues, the resource overuse problems, which cause resource scarcity, and the excessive waste generation or pollution that the planet can no longer contain. And the system has created extreme forms of inequality with impacts disproportionately felt by indigenous and local communities whose livelihoods are very much linked and intimately to their habitations. So in order to address our resource overuse and excessive waste generation, there needs to be a shift in the way we do our economy. So we need to protect the resources we have left through creating a nature positive future, and you need to stop excessive waste generation or pollution through implementing a circular economy, which here, not just about recycling, but also about eliminating waste and pollution, keeping materials in use for as long as possible, and in that way regenerates natural systems. And essentially, these two are the sub-priority areas under the sustainable and livable planet. Next slide. To enable this transformation, we need combinations of factors and roles from various stakeholders. The chart on the left outlines the enabling environment perspective, and the right chart is the different systems or sectors that need to be changed in order to realize this new economy. So today, we will be hearing directly from youths, from you all, representatives of the G20 countries and the EU, as well as observers from different backgrounds. And in your policy discussions, we hope we could reflect on, number one, the different system that needs to change. So the sectors, the enabling interventions for transformations, and we hope youths could encourage innovations, although the ideas doesn't have to be wild or something super new. It can be some old solution, but we haven't seen any results, and we can push in this session. And later on, we will also organize PRESUMMIT with speakers who can hopefully inspire the policy proposals even further. And then second, think also about what youth in your country wants. It can be something different from what the government or leaders in your country wants. I hope by now you have explored ways to gather insights from youth, whether it's through surveys or field trips in your countries. And we don't have to be like the G20 leaders because we are different, we are youths. And then lastly, to think about the concrete actions. The G20 and the Y20 meetings should not just be about meetings and making policies, but the Indonesian presidency this year would actually like to push for more concrete actions, both with what the leaders should do and also what we should do as youths. so that we can invigorate the urgency and what can actually be done after the summit. So we can now begin with the opening statements. I think we can stop sharing the screen now. Before we hear from your perspectives, I just also would like to remind everyone, and as stated also in our rules of procedure, I'd like to call upon delegates to capture the spirit of consensus building, which means that as a whole group, we are going to work hard to find a solution that addresses everyone's concerns. And today's discussion will be the first of many discussions you'll have, whether it's on record as well as off-record sessions. And today we hope to open up people's different perspectives, information, and ideas to this topic. As mentioned in the policy form, the objective today is to answer these questions. Number one, what urgent and specific actions that global leaders, particularly G20 leaders, need to take in order to shift to a new nature positive and circular economy? And number two, how do we enable a unified global response to the issue? And number three, what kind of support, resources, innovations, or tools are needed to help us, youths, play a large part in the solution and prepare youths for the changing environment? So without further ado, let us hear the opening statements from our distinguished delegates. Just a reminder, you have 3 minutes each, and I will call in alphabetical order. You will see there is a timer in your screen so that you can see how much time you have remaining. And I apologize beforehand if I have to cut you if you exceed the time limit. So the first delegate, I'd like to welcome the delegate from Argentina, Delegate of Argentina. The time is yours for the opening statement.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, everyone, once again. It is an honor for me to be able to represent Argentine youth on this pressing subject matter. Argentina was an active participant in the negotiation process that gave rise to the 2030 Agenda, the SDGs, and their associated targets. We uphold sustainable development as it essentially combines economic growth, social improvement, and environmental protection in a balanced, global, interdependent, and solidary manner. Climate change is the ultimate global challenge. It affects growth prospects, but also the very survival of species, including our own. This is the final decade of action and delivery to achieve our common goals. They cannot be separated from development priorities and poverty eradication, especially in the global south. Argentina fosters a sustainable recovery for the post-pandemic world within a framework of common but differentiated responsibilities. Today, global youth is watching us. Argentina is eager to rally all necessary voices to take the transformative path towards a sustainable future. We are fully aware of the productive, energetic, social, and cultural potential of this new path. We need to further carry out mitigation and adaptation to guarantee the integrity of natural ecosystems while generating climate co-benefits. Even so, it is clear that climate impacts can aggravate inequality. Climate justice begins with recognizing unevenly affected by the climate crisis. We acknowledge the need to specially protect vulnerable groups, such as rural coastal communities, indigenous peoples, migrant workers and their families, and younger generations, of course. Accordingly, the 3 pillars of a human rights approach for climate action are access to environmental information and education, direct public participation, and justice in environmental matters. This is the only way to build real circular economies. Likewise, the world needs to strengthen water management and further address the pollution is critical to spreading and sustaining best practices, innovation, and new strategies. Finally, we must advocate for subnational and local solutions through decentralized and bottom-up initiatives. It is essential to rebuild truly sustainable cities and societies with resilient urban planning and nature-based solutions. The key to success is engaging young people in urban governments for a more inclusive, sustainable, and livable planet. Fellow delegates, youth and climate action are quite the same. They shall no longer be placed in the future, but in the present. Argentina envisions a common future where truly No country and no one is left behind. Time is already up. We can forge something new. Let us care for a common home. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Delegate of Argentina. Next, Delegate of Australia. Delegate of Australia, the time is yours.
Selamat pagi, selamat siang, selamat malam. My name is Isabella and I'm the Australian delegate coming to you from the unceded Indigenous lands of the Gadigal people in Sydney, where in the last 5 years we have experienced 3 so-called once-in-a-lifetime extreme weather events. The Australian delegation therefore supports a rapid transition to carbon neutral, circular and nature positive economies. However, we realise that such a transition will have deep social impacts and therefore bring forward 3 proposals which seek to embed social and environmental justice in G20 initiatives. Our first proposal is related to natural capital. We understand that biodiversity conservation is a crucial strategy for protecting natural capital, however, has the potential to conflict with human and other species' rights. The G20 should therefore introduce legally binding and enforceable rights-based approaches into multilateral, national and regional frameworks for biodiversity protection. These should include the rights of all humans to a healthy environment, the rights of Indigenous communities, and the rights of nature. Frontline Indigenous and local communities should be at the forefront of the development, implementation and enforcement of such mechanisms. Our second proposal is related to just transitions and the need for a carbon neutral economy. With over 40% of emissions deriving from non-energy sectors, there's a need to ensure that just transition initiatives support workers in all industries. All G20 countries should therefore introduce and expand just transition strategies to incorporate workers in non-energy industries such as transport and agriculture. Workers and communities impacted should be at the forefront of developing these strategies, and marginalised groups such as youth, women, people with disabilities, and Indigenous communities should be involved in all decision-making processes. Our final proposal is related to an oft-overlooked aspect of the circular economy, disposal. Many hazardous wastes are unsuitable for reuse. However, limitations in waste treatment and disposal facilities in some countries has resulted in dangerous levels of hazardous waste accumulation. G20 should therefore foster multinational collaboration to accelerate the socially just and environmentally sound disposal of hazardous wastes, including nuclear, industrial, and electronic wastes. These should build upon existing multilateral waste conventions while supporting countries with more limited hazardous waste disposal facilities and reducing barriers to multinational waste disposal facilities. Thank you, and we look forward to working with fellow delegates and observers to build a communique that is socially, environmentally, and economically sustainable.
Thank you very much, Delegate of Australia. The next is Delegate of Brazil. Delegate of Brazil, the time is yours.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening. I am Natalia, the Brazilian delegate for the Sustainable and Livable Planet track for 2022. Firstly, I would like to compliment the organization for the event, the Global Attitude Institute that has given me the opportunity of being here as part of my country's delegation, and the SLP track for the engagement and proactivity. It's with great pleasure that I present the view of the Brazilian delegation towards the construction of a sustainable and livable planet for us and the generations to come. I would like to start my intervention with a quote from Ailton Krenek, Brazilian indigenous leader that wrote in his book, Ideas to Postpone the End of the World. We have been alienating ourselves from this organism of which we are part, the Earth, and come to think that it is one thing and we are another, the Earth and humanity. And then he completes, I don't understand where there is something other than nature. That said, and considering all the science-based information we have been gathering for the past years, we have to look forward to a future built upon a nature-positive growth, a post-COVID-19 green recovery, and also a just transition. Our proposals take into consideration a multi-stakeholder approach, including the participation of youth, women, and indigenous people and traditional communities. As the biggest 20 economies in the world, the G20 should aim to halt the biodiversity loss, in particular in the hotspot zones that are present in Brazil, but also in other member states. In this regard, it's necessary to highlight the importance of raising capacities on forest management, amplifying the investment in the area. Considering that G20 is responsible for 80% of global emissions and also for the majority of agricultural goods trade, it's crucial to talk about food systems. To guarantee food security and to produce food are two things that remains not related in the business as usual scenario. This subject is also a key for the agriculture and land use sectors, a main topic and challenge to Brazil. I would also like to reaffirm the importance of familiar agriculture for food security and a more nature positive and sustainable system. At last but not least, it's important to talk about the regenerative economy that beyond the idea of reusing resources and getting out the linear economy, it challenges the whole idea and logic of consumption. Moreover, sustainable consumption relies again on the participation of the various sectors, bringing to the table both civil society and private sector. Thank you for your time and attention. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Delegate of Brazil. Next is Delegate of Canada. Delegate of Canada, the time is yours.
Thank you, Track Chair. Good evening, bonsoir, Honorable Track Chair, distinguished guests, and fellow delegates. My name is Jody Ann Wong, and I am the Canadian delegate for the Sustainable and Livable Planet Track. I am from White Rock, BC, Canada, located on the traditional unceded territories of the Semiahmoo First Nation and the border territory of the Coast Salish peoples. I would like to first express my gratitude to Indonesian Youth Diplomacy and the organizing committee for today's pre-summit. The G20 has unparalleled resources to tackle the intersectional challenges posed by the climate crisis, and countries have a moral responsibility to contribute their fair share. As such, it is imperative to not only scale up concerted efforts by the G20, but also consider the implications of our actions on youths that are not part of this forum. And as such, on behalf of Canadian youths, the Canadian delegation would like to propose the following 3 priorities for this track. First, against the ongoing global energy security crisis, it is imperative that we accelerate the transition to net zero and build a clean and resilient global energy system. While recognizing different responsibilities, capabilities, and energy mixes of countries, the Canadian delegation proposes that G20 countries publish national plans for the full and equitable phase out of all fossil fuel subsidies. As part of this transition, we call for the development and implementation of a collective G20 Just Transition Action Plan with a prioritized focus on Indigenous and frontline communities and the burdens of a carbon debt to future generations. Second, we must work towards closing the global financing gap towards nature and people. The global financial sector's net zero commitment now exceeds over $130 trillion. And we now need to see implementation on the balance sheets for such commitments to hold any credibility. We need greater transparency and accountability of the capital allocation mechanisms that will deliver on a livable planet for the future. Moreover, the Canadian delegation hopes to see the mobilization of climate finance earmarked for youth development and nature-based solutions, particularly in least developed countries. Third, as Canada is home to 70% of the world's mining companies, it is within the duty of our delegation to call on governments to establish a G20 common framework of aligned and strengthened environmental social standards and supply chain transparency of critical raw materials that are key to the development of renewable technologies. Such a standard should enshrine the principles of free, prior, and informed consent across all jurisdictions and apply the circular economy principles in the technical cycle. And with that, I want to thank my fellow delegates for sharing your policy priorities. The Canadian delegation looks forward to working with you on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate of Canada. Is Delegate of China. Delegate of China, the time is yours.
Hi everyone, I am Zong Xu, the SLP delegate from China. It is so honorable today to represent China and share my point of view here with you here. And I will share from three aspects. The first proposal is of the safeguarding of natural capital. I was born in Guizhou, a province in southern China where ecological civilization is developing rapidly, and today I'm wearing our own traditional dress as well. Firstly, we consider strengthening biodiversity protection is very important, and it is advocated to reduce logging activities in ecologically fragile areas and create pioneer areas for vegetation restoration and ecological civilization construction globally. Secondly, a pest risk prevention and control governance system can be built and strive to control the rate of forestry pests to within 2 per 1,000 by 2013 globally. Then, wildlife epidemic sources and disease monitoring and control systems can be built and implement rare and endangered wildlife rescue and protection projects. It is also very important to develop comprehensive utilization of industrial resources. And the construction of comprehensive utilization basis for industrial resources, the large-scale and high-value utilization of industrial, soil waste, and renewable resources should be promoted. And the second proposal is to control the total amount of waste generated and discharged. In this case, we suggest to reduce the overuse of non-renewable resources globally and process continuation approaches to maximize the way and number of times products and services are used to effectively extend the time intensity of products and services. The third proposal is to provide youth scholars with researching opportunities via financial, educational, and technical support. In this case, promoting a platform with sustainable development-related activities for youth to actively participate in promoting a green, low-carbon global economy with innovations to achieve sustainable supply chains is of significance. The above 3 points summarize the main ideas of my proposals. Thank you so much for your attention. 谢谢.
Thank you very much, Delegate of China. Next is the Delegate of France. Delegate of France, the time is yours.
Dear delegates, dear all, my name is Juliette and I'm delighted to be here today to represent the French youth. As you may know, taking ambitious environmental measures is not an option for our generation, who will be the first one to live the consequences of years of inaction. My first set of proposals concern economic measures that are needed to reach a sustainable economy. G20 countries should establish a carbon tax on goods and services, complemented by a carbon border adjustment mechanism to engage all countries. A global taxonomy would also help redirect investments towards green assets and adaptation. I also think that governments and companies should be accountable for the achievement of concrete climate targets. Every single policy that governments take from now on should be compatible with Paris Agreement and measured thanks to new measures of well-being. Because about 70% of global GHG emissions come from energy, the energy transition needs to accelerate dramatically. G20 countries should phase out from all coal-fired plants by 2030, ban oil exploration starting now, remove all subsidies on fossil fuels, and reduce drastically methane emissions. With a huge part of fossil fuels being used for transportation, it is crucial that we reduce and decarbonize this sector, for instance, by taxing aviation and maritime fuels. But the climate crisis is not as critical as biodiversity collapse that has already started. We are living the sixth mass extinction that our planet has ever lived, the last one being the extinction of dinosaurs. We need to stop deforestation and land artificialization. Because land and sea use are the greatest cause of biodiversity loss, we need to protect marine floors and fragile ecosystems, not exploit them nor mine them. We need to stop subsidizing unsustainable agriculture and livestock farming, as well as mass fishery. As for air, water, and soil pollutions, we have also reached a critical level. Governments should take measures such as prohibiting single-use plastics and find alternatives to biochemical pollutants from agriculture. Finally, none of these measures will be understood if G20 citizens are not aware of the issues at stake. That's why educating students, professionals, and above all, policymakers on environmental issues is key. Thank you very much for your attention. Merci à tous.
Thank you very much, Delegate of France. Next is Delegate of Germany. I want to ask if the Delegate of Germany is here. If not, I've actually received message that there's electricity issues from their end. So I will call Germany again at the end of the rest of the opening statements. So next is the Delegate of India. Delegate of India, the time is yours.
Thank you. Vanakkam and Namaste from India. I'm Niveda Karthipan from Tamil Nadu, which is a rich state in India. So I would like to thank the Indian Youth Diplomacy for granting me this opportunity. The impact of traditional manufacturing on a planet's valuable but limited resources, as well as climate change, is undeniable. Now the challenge is, how can we pursue industrial growth while still being conscious of traditional production's environmental impact? Green economy has recently risen to prominence as a crucial idea on the global agenda for sustainable development. A deteriorating climate and diminishing natural resources have hampered the world's exceptional development record, necessitating huge move toward a green and decarbonized economy. Consumers' attention has been drawn to a greener economy as a result of COVID-19, forcing brands to default to sustainability. As a result, we must shift to a circular economy with the help of the government and enterprises. Hence, we prioritize circular economy, green jobs, and green manufacturing in our policy proposal. We can achieve a circular economy firstly by promoting zero carbon and low carbon technologies across the entire value chain, as well as emission reduction plans based on life cycle assessment for products and packaging. Secondly, by including a green financing approach by enterprises like commercial companies with social or environmental purpose in addition to a profit-making goal. And lastly, adopting a dynamic and phased strategy to measuring economic impact, stimulating circular investments, and transitioning from a linear to a completely circular economy. And for increasing green job opportunities, firstly, by developing country-specific business reasons for adjusting current policies and programs. Secondly, encouraging collaboration with public and private sector advocates and strengthening technical assistance for youth employment and green jobs at the country level based on national partners' needs. And lastly, working with national service providers and training institutions that have the capacity and incentives to integrate skill development and matching, entrepreneurship and information services into their service portfolios. And lastly, in a proposal, green manufacturing can be implemented by focusing on lean manufacturing, where repurposing materials and recovering resources are part of the process. In the sharing economy, predictive maintenance can be utilized to improve the lifespan and durability of machinery and equipment while utilizing a renewable energy source. And thank you. Can't wait to meet you all at the summit. I would like to yield my time.
Thank you very much, Delegate of India. Next is the Delegate of Indonesia. Delegate of Indonesia, the time is yours.
I can't.
I think you are unmuted already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Honorable delegates, this year the IPCC published the bleakest climate report to date, and the UN Secretary General called on the G20 for immediate unified action. To secure a livable future, we also call on the G20 to first close the adaptation and mitigation gap, mandate that all technologies developed for climate change mitigation and adaptation are and remain open source, Article 10 of the Paris Agreement recognized the importance of technology for the implementation of mitigation and adaptation. Governments must provide support for open source technologies that enable equitable, democratic participation and increased cooperation on technology development, transfer, and maintenance. We have seen how vaccine patents have failed the global south and prolonged the pandemic. This failure of patenting cannot be repeated as we address the climate emergency. Second, integrate health and climate agendas under a planetary health framework. Implement an intergenerational framework for biodiversity conservation, including establishing clear, transparent, and legally binding definitions of restoration, conservation, and metrics to measure their progress. Strengthen land tenure security for Indigenous and local communities, and ensure that resident communities are the primary leader for the management and monitoring of conservation areas, placing local knowledge at the forefront. And correct GDP measures to include the cost of all environmental externalities and account for impacts on biodiversity, health, and loss calculated for at least the next 7 generations. Third, make climate financing accountable and accessible, and prioritize the most at-risk groups, including youth. At least 50% of all climate funds must be allocated for adaptation, and all climate financing must include open data for transparent tracking of progress and outcomes. Finally, massively accelerate a just energy transition with legally binding measures for decarbonization targets. Mandate all companies to report annual data on emissions, energy consumption, and extraction activities subject to public auditing and criminal liabilities. Support the labor transition with skill building programs and incentives for community ownership models of public utilities and water management. Youth will bear the largest costs and burdens of a more extreme climate. However, young people are not just a vulnerable group. We are the change that will address the climate emergency. We call on the G20 to join us, and I look forward to working with all delegates, youth, and residents in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate of Indonesia. Next is Delegate of Italy. Delegate of Italy, the time is yours.
Terima kasih, Madam Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to delegates and friends from all over the world. My name is Francesco, and as the youth delegate from Italy, I'm personally very proud that last year's G20 negotiations resulted in a general agreement on words which reaffirm the spirit of Paris. The youth represent, however, are calling on G20 leaders to back up their words with concrete actions. We, the Y20 delegates, should take up that call and put together a list of recommendations which are sufficiently specific and immediately actionable. The Italian delegation, in this sense, identified 3 critical gaps in the current G20 debate on sustainability. Addressing these 3 gaps will be crucial, we believe, in moving from words to actions and creating a more sustainable and livable planet. The first gap is the gap between ambitions and reality, essentially the need for investments. And in order to fill that gap, we need to fulfill the potential of climate finance, especially in emerging economies. G20 leaders should consider first to create new financial instruments targeted to smaller as well as innovative providers. Second, to gradually adopt a common standard of reporting for Y20 issuers. And third, to further diversify the opportunities for investment, including youth-led projects. The second gap is the gap between science and policy. And addressing this gap requires the G20 leaders to agree on a common framework within which governments can then develop their national strategies to make economies more circular. In order to do that, they can start by expanding investment in eco-efficiency research and development, identify high-level guiding principles for bioeconomy policymaking, and making sustainable consumption a core module in school curricula. The third and final gap we need to address is the gap between the big picture and our daily life. One way to make global issues more relatable to our everyday experience is to think of the problem as something very simple, like the way we eat. And the solution then is straightforward, transforming our food systems. G20 can help doing that by repurposing agricultural subsidies to promote sustainable production technique, reviewing dietary guidelines to include environmental considerations, and introducing sustainability risk assessments in the process to establish new global standards for international trade in food. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to working together to bridge these gaps and help the transition towards a more livable future. Grazie mille.
Thank you very much, the Delegate of Italy. Next is the Delegate of Japan. I would like to confirm if the Delegate of Japan is here already. Okay, we will move on to the next delegate, which is the Delegate of Mexico. The Delegate of Mexico, the time is yours.
Buenos dias, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. The Mexican delegation greatly appreciates your time and preparation and would like to present our policy proposals, starting off with a brief preamble. Sustainability is all about being on the right side of history. Since 1970, the global economy has grown nearly fivefold, while population has virtually doubled. The exact economic damage caused by a ton of CO2 remains unclear, but as massive consumption intensifies, a growing number of studies suggest that carbon pricing is one of the most efficient alternatives we currently have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, correcting market failures by pricing the external costs of carbon. Urgent action is required in order to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, and our coordinated efforts can motivate decision makers to talk about the materiality of climate change, and particularly the viability of putting a price on carbon. Mexico's recent introduction of carbon taxes at the subnational level resonates with the efforts of multiple G20 member countries, leading up to our first policy recommendation. Building a multilateral information system that increases transparency in carbon pricing mechanisms and draws attention to governments and organizations that promote related initiatives. Our proposal is a low-cost solution and has two main objectives: to reduce the information gaps between governments and organizations, particularly those within the private sector, and to help new carbon price adopters in their decision-making process. In accordance with the Y20's sub-priority areas, a proposal on circular economy through sustainable production and consumption will also be promoted by the Mexican delegation. It is estimated that 2.1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas were emitted just in 2018, making up about 4% of the total global emissions. G20 member countries have incorporated the circular economy framework to their agenda, overlooking at times the new opportunities that virtual marketplaces and mainstream social media present. Combining taxation and fees collection initiatives for companies that promote single-use items as part of their business model is required, subsequently encouraging medium-sized businesses that deal second-hand products, helping them earn visibility and remain profitable by profiting their services and providing economic aid when proven to be convenient. Both of our proposals stand out because of the low cost associated with their implementation and their scalability. Being non-aggressive and non-interventionist proposals, we are certain that achieving results and consensus is a possibility. Do not hesitate to reach out and let us know if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate of Mexico. Next, we'll hear from the Delegate of Russia. Delegate of Russia, the time is yours.
Dear colleagues, fellow delegates, indeed, a sustainable and livable planet is our common goal and aspiration. Moreover, it is in our common interest that such a planet is not a privilege, but our everyday reality. Building upon existing multilateral arrangements, including COP26, we propose a 4E plan for energy and environment. First, emissions. we encourage the G20 states to set up their economy-wide emission trading systems that will enable a more comprehensive scheme of greenhouse gas emissions records. Given that multiple G20 states have already embarked upon shaping their own ETSs, it is important to continue these developments while also acknowledging initiatives already in place or underway. Second, economy. With operational economy-wide emission trading systems, it will be crucial to proceed with subsequent integration of existing systems. However, it is not going to be an easy task. And so it is now that we need to explore the best available options. An integration of ETSs is primarily aimed at promoting mutual trust across jurisdictions when verified carbon credits are subject to equitable transboundary exchange rules. The third step is ensuring transparency. Although we all agree that energy transition should be just, we oftentimes forget about the element that makes it possible, strategic metals. While recognizing its tremendous role in our industries, it is instrumental to help increase transparency as per its environmental impact and social value. With this being said, we find it timely to start developing an international certification scheme, which can be called Jakarta Process Certification Scheme. And last but not least, equal terms. In order to move forward with finding solutions to the many complex issues we are facing, we need to first agree on common language and common approaches. For this purpose, we support establishing a common ground taxonomy that has already been on the agenda of G20, but it is in our power to make it move forward. All in all, we are looking forward to further cooperation as we truly believe that sustainable and livable planet is our common priority. Thank you very much. Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much, Delegate of Russia. Next, we will hear from the Delegate of Saudi Arabia. Delegate of Saudi Arabia, the time is yours.
Dear Indonesian Presidency and fellow delegates, peace be upon you all. Today I stand in front of you as a fellow inhabitant of planet Earth before anything else, a human trying to understand how we've reached the state we're in today, as we are at the verge of a sixth mass extinction, this time caused by human activities alone. Therefore, we, the Y20 Saudi delegation, urge the D20 leaders to rethink the status quo, embrace new ways of thinking, and actively engage in widespread system innovation in a manner that aims to deal with the core issue of climate change rather than the symptoms alone. Hence, we recommend the following. Firstly, we urge the G20 leaders to adopt clear policies, regulations, and frameworks to facilitate the transition towards a well-being economy and to normalize new metrics to measure economic progress that consider our collective well-being rather than the GDP alone. Secondly, we stress the importance of investing in well-being, the SDGs and circular economy programs, capacity building and trainings for both students and their teachers, as well as to adapt informal and interactive nature-based learning environments to not only heal the disconnect between humanity and nature, but also to raise biosphere awareness. Additionally, we recommend the establishment of a local well-green school network under the Ministry of Education to work in close coordination with UNESCO's Associate School Network to push the SDG agenda further. Thirdly, to adapt to their AI-driven world, we suggest the creation of a unified global green reward system that tracks and encourages sustainable and healthy behaviors and incentivizes users with green credit that can be utilized to purchase other sustainable products and services, donate, or simply plant a tree. An incentive for all, the public, local businesses, SMEs, and many industries to go circular. Lastly, improved regulations to encourage industries to adopt circular behavior from ideation, design, and implementation is required, but so is their active participation. We encourage industries to invest in their ESG or CSR efforts toward raising awareness, targeting the public to embrace a circular mindset and attitude. But awareness alone will not allow us to achieve our net zero emission and waste objective, if not followed by action. As a result, the investment in the infrastructure required is crucial for optimal result. With that said, fellow delegates, we, the Saudi Youth and Delegation, are committed to recovering together and recovering stronger. And with a holistic, human-centric approach in mind, faithful hearts, and a collective commitment and shared accountability, we know a prosperous future awaits us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Delegate of Saudi Arabia. Next, we'll hear from the Delegate of South Africa. Delegate of South Africa, the time is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Greetings to the Chair and esteemed delegates. The global surface temperature for January 2022 was 0.89 degrees Celsius, which was above the 20th century average. In South Africa, as in the rest of the world, the situation of the deteriorating resource base makes it imperative for us to go beyond thinking in terms of trade-offs. We must accept the social, economic, and ecosystem factors that are embedded within each other and are underpinned by our systems of governance. Thus, we propose an intersectional sustainability approach. As a delegation of South Africa, we recognize the imperativeness for an intersectional, inclusive, and accelerated action to ensure the sustainability of our planet. As such, we have highlighted key themes, which include economic development, climate action, governance, and lastly, youth advocacy and education. Our first pillar, being economic development, includes developing a circular economic implementation plan, as well as ensuring that labor markets are inclusive and apply sustainable practices, as well as providing high-quality green jobs and upskilling opportunities. We suggest developing an inclusive transboundary tax system that will ensure an affordable energy transition, as well as supporting the investment of renewable energy. We further urge businesses to ensure sustainable use practices, as well as incentivizing businesses to ensure efficient use of natural resources. Our second pillar is climate action. We propose that we prioritize building a decarbonized economy, as well as a just transition to renewable energy. We encourage sustainable planning, as well as boosting support into research about the effects of climate change. Our third pillar is governance. We recommend that we ensure the efficient management of finances from carbon tax, as well as revising policy and legislation to foster biodiversity conservation and environmental sustainability. And fourthly, our last pillar is, in terms of achieving a sustainable future, is youth advocacy and education. We suggest the establishment of youth advisory councils that will ensure that young people have the platform to be at the forefront of the climate crisis, as well as mandating environmental sustainability education in schools, covering topics such as biodiversity, ecological degradation, as well as disasters. Lastly, we call upon organizations, prominent figures of society, to ensure the security of our future. Building a climate resilient world requires honest reflection of our pitfalls and the inclusion of young people in achieving a sustainable and prosperous future. Thank you, Chair. I leave my time to you.
Thank you very much, Delegate of South Africa. Next is the Delegate of South Korea. Just checking if the Delegate of South Korea is here. If not, we will go to the Delegate of Turkey. The Delegate of Turkey, the time is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Greetings from Turkish delegation. It's my honor today to address you, the distinguished delegates and the chair. My name is Berk Cem Tatar. I'm Turkish delegate for Sustainable and Livable Planet. Today, among many topics, I had to choose three most important topics from our proposal, namely the Zero Waste Initiative, eco-labeling, and the collaboration with youth branches of other international organizations. To start with the Zero Waste Initiative, I would like to emphasize that we share this world with 8.7 million other species. The world population was 1.5 billion in the 20th century, but now are some 8 billion people on Earth. The capacity to process and produce resources increased threefold, while consumption quadrupled. We currently consume resources 1.7 times faster than they can regenerate them. So this means we are borrowing from the future. It is self-evident that our world has limited resources. We are aware of the fact that we must adopt perspective, use as much as we need, or reuse it all, rather than using one-way disposables in an effort to make more efficient use of resources. First, actually, it started at all the service buildings of Ministry of Environment, Urbanization, and Climate Change of Turkey. Taking the Turkish way as an example, in order to overcome the starving throughout the world, wasted foods should be recycled and turned into products to serve as a raw material for industrialists. Organic waste such as vegetables and fruits should be turned into compost so that they can be used as a manure in parks and greenery zones. The leftover foods should be shipped into animal shelters. By doing this, nature positive and the circular economy can be achieved and enhanced. The second proposal is eco-label system. As we all know, in 1992, the UN took a milestone step, thus officially adopting the label on the sidelines of the UN Conference on Environment and Development, as it was described as a promotion of environmental labeling and other environmental products information schemes designed to help consumers make informed choices. In Turkey, the initiative entered into force initially for 3 industries, paper, ceramics, and textiles in 2018. It is that evident that investment in labeling is the smartest choice to export goods in markets where consumers tend to go for environmentally friendly products or to go get more shares in those markets through eco-labeling, one of the methods adopted by businesses to raise environmental standards. Producers who think that the products are more affordable in environmental costs are not added will realize that those costs do not make business sustainable in the long run. Therefore, enhancing the eco-friendly labeling system to the product among G20 countries should be included to our community. And the last but not least, in order to increase the positive effect of Y20 communities and other related summits, it should be borne in mind that concrete collaborations with youth branches of international organizations, such as United Nations for Youth or NATO Youth Summit should be increased. For example, joint meetings or summits shall be held. Among other, those 3 topics are Turkey's proposal for sustainable and livable planet. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Delegate of Turkey. Next, we will hear from the Delegate of United Kingdom. Delegate of United Kingdom, the time is yours.
Selamat malam, pagi, sore. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm Michaela Chan, the UK Delegate for Sustainable and Livable Planet. Following consultation with young people of the UK, our delegation has put together 3 priority focus areas on this track. Firstly, resilience and adaptation. Secondly, biodiversity and natural capital. And thirdly, corporate transparency. A World Meteorological Organization report on disaster statistics released last year showed that over the last half-century, a climate or water-related disaster has occurred daily on average, resulting in an average of 115 deaths and $202 million in losses a day. We urge the G20 to strengthen global climate information and early warning systems through climate stress testing and knowledge sharing on adaptation measures between the Global South and the Global North, and increase co-designed risk reduction programs with the most affected people and areas. As climate change and globalization change land use, zoonotic diseases such as COVID-19 are becoming more prevalent. Our early warning system should link with global public health early warning systems to facilitate integrated preparedness. Early warning systems must comprise 4 interacting elements, namely risk knowledge, monitoring and warning services, dissemination and communication, and lastly, response capacity. These must be coupled with increased funding for resilience and adaptation, particularly for community and youth-led schemes and nature-based solutions. Along similar lines, 57% of UK youth believe that reversal of damage to biodiversity and habitats and conservation of oceans are the most important issues to tackle when it comes to environment and climate change. The IPCC report this year stated that by restoring degraded ecosystems and conserving 30 to 50% of Earth's habitats, society can benefit from nature's capacity to absorb and store carbon and accelerate progress towards sustainable development. As such, we urge the G20 to increase global investment and collaboration on tools to measure and monitor the state of biodiversity and natural capital to reinforce links to the climate crisis. These metrics facilitate the equitable and effective conservation of 50% of Earth's habitats to enable climate change resilience and protect services critical to life and livelihood, such as food and water. Our third proposal is for the G20 to create corporate transparency through robust green transition plans and efficient carbon taxing. Corporations must disclose double materiality, including direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions, land and water use, climate risk impacts on business, and a roadmap to meet climate goals. Progress against these goals and the metrics used to measure impacts must be reported to governments annually. At the consumer level, 42% of UK youth believe that making conscious consumer choices is the most effective way that young people can positively impact climate change or the environment. Regulators must introduce a new labeling system highlighting key data for products and services to effectively encourage more conscious, sustainable choices. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to coming together to deliver on the promise of a sustainable and livable planet for all future generations.
Thank you very much, the Delegate of the United Kingdom. Next, we will hear from the Delegate of the United States of America. The Delegate, the time is yours.
Terima kasih, Madam Chair. Dear fellow youth, distinguished dignitaries and delegates and hosts, my name is Elke Esmeralda Tikume, and it is an honor to represent the United States of America from New York City. Following the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and the upturn in economic activity, America's petroleum-related CO2 emissions increased 8% in 2021. In order to keep our global temperature increase to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius, as recommended by the Paris Agreement, it is critical that we, as G20 countries, lead the way in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to below 50% by 2030 and work together to create sustainable policies for us all to reach net zero emissions by 2050. I, for one, believe that this is possible, but we must start making more impact towards this now. Another critical priority for the American youth is diverting away from fossil fuels and eventually eliminating them altogether. In order to achieve this, we must invest heavily in innovative and sustainable forms of energy. We have to make buying personal fuel-operated cars less attractive and rethink sustainable transport and make it more accessible, varied, far-reaching, and affordable for most people. To meet these goals, we must rethink how to make this shift inclusive and feasible for other nations and groups who are most affected by our policies, namely those in the Global South and Indigenous peoples. One such idea is expanding carbon pricing and increasing the proportion of taxes paid by countries with the highest consumption. Outsourcing carbon emissions to other countries to mask a country's own emissions should carefully be considered and heavily reduced. Another key priority is focusing on a circular economy. Reducing waste is a must, as is promoting recycling and shifting production and consumption away from fast fashion and plastic use towards an alternative green consumption and the use of sustainable materials. Shifting to a circular economy also has positive effects on biodiversity and ocean protection, which is also another US priority area. To supplement this, investing in restoring habitats and setting up protected marine and biodiversity havens must also be considered. As we, the youth, are the future leaders of tomorrow, and given that we will be the ones living with the consequences of our leaders' actions, it is important, no, it is imperative that the G20 leadership create seats at the table for youth. And I don't mean performative seats for 1 to 2 youth to represent a whole, but many seats for many youth from around the world who represent different segments of our society, of our global society, to be included at all levels, global, national, and local. Seats should not only be given to the elite, but to the youth in all aspects of society. Our voices need to be heard, and more than that, our ideas need to be incorporated and taken seriously. So to all the youth and people tuned in today, let's work together to hold our nations accountable to creating a sustainable and livable planet for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, the delegate from the United States of America. Next, we will hear from the delegate of the European Union. Delegate of the European Union, the time is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished chairs, delegates, and observers. My name is Tom Almeida, and I'm delighted to represent the European Youth for Sustainable and Livable Planet at Y20 2022. The EU delegation would like to share 2 policy proposals across the Y20 themes of safeguarding nature and sustainable consumption and the circular economy, where we see policy gaps and opportunities. Our first policy proposal is to safeguard nature via green microbonds. Nature-based solutions that protect, restore, and manage natural ecosystems have received too little attention and investment. However, these solutions could achieve up to 37% of the emissions reductions needed by 2030. funds for nature-based solutions currently only come from institutions. And we believe that there's an opportunity to augment financing by democratizing access for the public and for youth via green microbonds, which would allow individuals to directly invest in nature-positive growth. The G20 could serve as a vehicle of international cooperation to design such a financing mechanism, and the EU delegation recommends several considerations for this policy proposal. First, we should design for inclusivity. Green microbonds must be affordable and accessible to all. Second, we must ensure a just transition. Funds should be used for vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. Third, we should guarantee trust via transparent monitoring and accounting frameworks. And fourth, we can drive engagement and adoption via public education efforts and by ensuring return on investment. Our second policy proposal is Scope 3 emissions disclosure rules for sustainable consumption. Scope 3 emissions, which are indirect emissions spanning the entire value chain for companies, can comprise up to 90% of the total carbon footprint for businesses. But these indirect emissions are notoriously difficult to quantify and influence. And within Scope 3, the use of sold products and their end-of-life treatments by consumers can represent a large share of overall emissions. Now, the design of a policy framework and disclosure rules for Scope 3 links directly to the promotion of sustainable consumption and circular economy models, since companies would be accountable for the emissions impact of all their upstream and downstream activities, so also how they engage with their consumers. We're already witnessing early momentum from governments. The EU is considering introducing conceptual guidelines for environmental impact metrics, such as Scope 3 emissions, late next year. And earlier this month, the SEC in the US proposed a landmark ruling for the disclosure of Scope 3 if these are material to a company. The EU delegation encourages the G20 to promote the adoption of Scope 3 emissions disclosure rules and recommends several considerations. First, we must aim for international harmonization of Scope 3 emissions disclosure rules. Second, we should develop standardization, measurement, and reporting frameworks. Third, we ought to consider a phased implementation across geographies and across industries. And lastly, Scope 3 emissions disclosure should be mandatory, not voluntary. Thank you to all, with a special note of gratitude to Indonesia for hosting this important dialogue. We're eager to develop our policy proposals further and welcome collaboration with all G20 delegations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the delegate of the European Union. Now we would like to welcome the observers to also give their views. The first one, I'd like to welcome the Asean Observer. If you are here with us, we'd like to invite you to deliver your views and opening statement. Delegate of ASEAN, if you are here.
Okay. Sawadee ka. Greetings from Bangkok, Thailand. Dear track chair, fellow delegates, and observers, my name is Jitsai Santaputra, and I'm representing ASEAN, and it is an honor for me to be here with you today. There have never been a time where climate change has ever been more urgent, more pressing, or more devastating than it is today, as was well noted at COP26. Human activities are the main cause of today's planetary crisis. Scientists around the world have warned that our planetary systems are being strained and stretched to a breaking point. We need to radically transform our economy into one that puts nature at the center and embraces a circular economy model across all national policies. Before the damage on our planet becomes irreversible, we need urgent action to ensure that survival of our planet, our home, is taken. The ASEAN delegation agrees with the Y20 white paper that we all need a stable climate, abundant biodiversity, healthy oceans, productive land, and sustainable fresh water to be able to thrive and prosper as a nation, as a continent, as the global community. To ensure a sustainable and livable planet for future generations, it is absolutely critical to limit global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius while achieving sustainable development, and it will require large investments and a deliberate shift towards low carbon, climate resilient economic models. The first policy proposal is the establishment of a dedicated climate fund for small-scale grassroots and youth-led projects, which addresses climate change mitigation and adaptation, which are solidly grounded in national circumstances and opportunities. Secondly, transitioning towards a carbon-neutral future requires a just energy transition, which incorporates appropriate timely, and effective energy policies and energy diversification of resources, which supports the rising global energy demand, as well as reducing the associated environmental impacts. To enable a gradual shift of baseload power from fossil fuel towards renewable energy, a proposal for energy transition national roadmap focused on phasing out fossil fuels, coupled with increased investments in energy storage systems and market digitization and decentralization, while ensuring affordable and accessible energy for all. Lastly, to move away from take, make, waste models towards a circular economy approach, the ASEAN delegation proposes a third policy to support government-funded educational programs in primary and secondary schools to foster understanding, awareness, and best practices on sustainable consumption and production. It is undeniable that youth participation and involvement is critical for our global community to transition to a circular economy. Honorable delegates, observers, track chairs, the ASEAN delegation looks forward to cooperating with you and working on a practical, timely, and impactful solution. Khop kun kha. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asean Observer. We now will hear from Observer from Timor-Leste. Observer from Timor-Leste, if you are here, I'd like to hear your opening statements and views. Okay, I believe Observer from Timor-Leste is not here. We will then move on to the next Observer from the World Bank. Observer from the World Bank, if you're here.
Good morning. Yeah,
yours.
I'm here.
Great.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm having some connectivity issues, but I'm able to present. My name is Daniel. I'm here to represent the World Bank. I just wanted to say that I currently work for IFC, which is the World Bank private sector agency, but before I was part of the energy technical global practice, and I was working in most of the topics you mentioned it. So for me, it's very, very exciting to see your ideas. My proposal is a little bit more specific, a little bit technical, but I think it has a lot of potential. It focuses on Indonesia, but it can also be applied to any other country. When we think about green growth, when we think about the Paris Agreement targets, we think about sustainability in general in the energy sector. We tend to focus on expanding the supply. We tend to focus on build solar PV plants and build wind energy farms, which, by the way, are fantastic. But in my operational experience, we are missing a hidden field. We are missing energy efficiency strategies for countries. Just to give you an example, for the case of Indonesia, 30% of the country's total energy consumption comes from buildings. And this is a trend among a lot of countries. For example, in Panama, a country I worked on, 45% comes from the use of air conditioning appliances. Energy efficiency is not as sexy as renewable energy investments, but contribute to reduce electricity demand, alleviate pressure on prices, which also gives more sustainability for the power sector. And not only that, it also benefits the most vulnerable people as we make basic energy services more affordable. And it also has an impact on public finances. But why are we not implementing energy efficiency? Why is this question still on the table? I think it's a mix. We would say political will, we say lack of understanding. And this proposal, what I want to just to tell you is how we can have, how we can influence at a high political level the implementation on these activities. And it's basically based on two super simple pillars. The beauty of energy efficiency is that it's not rocket science, it's simple and effective. And the first thing when we look at countries is we need to understand, we need to develop and sort of identify the highest energy opportunities. In this case, usually are buildings and electricity appliances. We also need to work on regulatory frameworks and building consensus. And also the second part is to enable the local capacity in countries so that private sector participants can also expand. I think my time is about to finish. I don't want to, I mean, you can read my proposal. I'm sorry I couldn't finish everything, but just remember, energy efficiency is the hidden field of the future, and it's going to be fundamental to decarbonize economies among our countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, observer from the World Bank. We will now hear from observer of Pacific Island, if you are here with us. Observer from the Pacific Island. Okay, I believe observer from Pacific Island is not here. Next is I want to check observer from the Asian Development Bank, if you are here present with us to deliver your views. Okay, I think that's it from the observer side. We now have heard from all delegates and observers. I wonder if I missed anybody or delegates that I have not called. I have received message that the delegate of Germany is back with better connection. Should we try to have you here, delegate of Germany?
Yes. So hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes, you loud and clear. The time is yours, delegate of Germany.
So hopefully you can hear me now. I'm really happy to share my thoughts right now, as I'm in Sri Lanka at the moment, and as just a power cut happened the last 2 hours. It was very difficult to follow, but I managed a little bit, and now the power is back, and now I can tell you a little bit our ideas of the German youth organizations. We think that it's very important that we have an interdisciplinary approach between all the tracks to find solution, to also work between the other tracks, that we have in a short and in a long term, a sustainable and livable planet. We like the idea and we support the circular economy and the green businesses. And also we think it is necessary to shift the GDP thoughts and more to a value-based framework and measurements, as already mentioned. Young people should be given the opportunity to join in this labor market, and therefore low entry barriers should be promoted, especially also with equality and fair remuneration. This especially links to the ideas of the social entrepreneurship of the youth employment track. We also think that we also want to foster environmental education on every level and making it tangible for each and everyone. And this also links to the fact that we have to take geographical specificities into consideration. Also, the goal is to raise this environmental awareness, and it can be achieved through the implementation, for example, of global and regional learning hubs to foster the exchange between non-governmental organizations. Therefore, however, G20 countries have to provide funding. We are also asking the NGOs of all societal fields like sport, art, and democratic youth work to integrate the climate action in their daily work. Global solutions, as already mentioned, must have equal standards, for example, in the field of carbon pricing, taxation of aviation fuel, cryptocurrency, and blockchain. And when talking about that, we also demand regulatory measures and that are emphasized that this blockchain is only driven by renewable energies, as they have a pretty high energy consumption. This is what we want to emphasize, especially when it comes to interdisciplinary approaches. And also there is one thing which is very important to us, is the so-called climate security nexus, as security and peace are the basis for a sustainable and livable planet. And only without conflicts and safe spaces, the development and transformation of society, and especially for young people, can be assured. And this leads, of course, to resilient communities and infrastructure in the face of more extreme weather phenomena. We want to create awareness for that, and especially through campaigns and educational programs. And we think that there must be more places for exchange of NGOs and civil society to be part of the solution. Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity right now after the power cut.
Thank you very much, the delegate of Germany. We have heard from all the delegates and observers. Thank you very much, dear delegates and observers. What a day. We have heard your ideas and proposals. I noted some cross-cutting themes on several topics. So first one I've heard around just transitions, including energy transition and protecting the vulnerable groups. And then on accelerating climate finance and sustainable investment, around water management, energy efficiency, developing international sustainable certification and labeling, education and training in green jobs, greater waste management, nature-based solutions, and protecting biodiversity. I'm sure there are definitely more that we can jot down once we consolidate your written policy proposals. But for now, let's give everybody a round of applause for your great ideas and initial policy recommendations. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, we are striving to build consensus where the whole group has to work hard at finding solutions that can address everyone's concerns. Now that we have heard from each other, we will allow these upcoming weeks for all of us to process this information, and we will share all the policy proposals with the delegates. You are welcome to discuss the matter at an off-record sessions or organize bilateral meetings among yourselves to understand each other's concerns. From our side, what will happen next is that we will try to come up with a draft communique based on all of your proposals. And in parallel, we will also organize a formal group chat through Slack or Yammer. We will update you more on that so that everyone can have access and ask questions. As a reminder, we will have sessions every month on the third week of each month around this time. So in April 24th, the first on-record discussion. The second on-record discussion is on May 22nd, which also is the pre-summit for Sustainable and Livable Planet. And then the third one is the on-record discussion, which will happen in June 19th. And then lastly is the summit itself, which will happen in July 20th until 22nd. Please familiarize yourself as well with the rules of procedures for your next session so that you are aware on how to give intervention in the session. As always, the Delegate Relations Officer would be happy to help you with any questions or support that you need. Before we end, I was informed to take a picture of the whole group. So if you can turn on your camera and then we can take the picture. Okay, I will start with the first page. Okay, so everyone, in 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you. And then let's go to the next page. Okay, next page, the second page. I'll take the picture in 3, 2, 1. All right, I think we only have 2 pages. Right. Okay, thank you very much. On behalf of the Y20 Organizing Committee, thank you very much for your time and wonderful insights and ideas. And thank you also for the team behind that has worked hard to make this first session happen. I look forward to seeing you and discussing with you further on our next meeting. Thank you.